I still remember the sound of the gravel under my shoes as I walked up the long path to the vineyard that morning. It was bright and sunny, the kind of day people dream of for a wedding. The flowers were in full bloom, the air carried a sweetness from the nearby orange groves, and I told myself just for a moment that this day would be a celebration of family, of love, of belonging. My brother, James, was the groom. He was younger than me by 4 years, and ever since the day he was born, I had made it my quiet mission to protect him, to support him, to be there in every way a sister could. I thought of all those nights I had stayed awake helping him finish his college applications, or the times I'd slipped him a little cash when rent was tight. And now, as I walked into that sunlit courtyard, I truly believed this wedding would be as much my moment of joy as his. But the moment I crossed the threshold, reality greeted me in a different form. Guests milled about with glasses of champagne, their laughter light and carefree. The women wore pastel dresses that matched the floral arrangements, and the men stood in polished suits, shaking hands as if it were a corporate event rather than a wedding. I searched for familiar faces, expecting smiles, hugs, someone to say, "Helen, we're so glad you're here." Instead, I felt eyes sliding past me, glances that lingered for half a second before moving on, as though I were part of the scenery and not the sister of the groom. And then came Margaret. She looked radiant, of course the bride always does. Her gown was ivory silk, her hair styled in loose waves like something from a magazine. She walked toward me with that kind of perfect smile people practice in mirrors, all teeth and no warmth. "Helen," she said, her voice coated in sweetness, "thank you for coming." Before I could answer, she tilted her head and added, "Why don't you stand by the hallway during the ceremony? That way you won't get in the family photos." Her tone was polite, almost musical, but her words landed like a blade. For a moment, I thought I had misheard. Me, the groom's only sister, asked to step aside, to remove myself from the very images that would one day tell the story of our family. I opened my mouth, ready to say something, but then I looked around. No one objected. My parents, busy greeting other guests, didn't glance my way. My aunts and uncles chatted over wine, oblivious. And James, my brother, the one I had supported all his life, was nowhere in sight. So I swallowed my words. I gave Margaret a polite nod, as though her suggestion had been reasonable, and I walked past her with my head held high. But inside, something shifted. That was the moment I realized I hadn't been invited to this wedding as family. I had been invited as background. And backgrounds, as I was about to learn, can disappear. I walked further into the courtyard, telling myself to stay calm, to brush off the sting of Margaret's words. After all, weddings can be stressful. Maybe she hadn't meant it the way it sounded. Maybe I was just being too sensitive. But the universe seemed determined to prove otherwise. Near the front of the reception hall, a large gilded mirror displayed the seating chart. Elegant cursive letters spelled out every guest's name, carefully placed under numbered tables. I leaned in, scanning the list slowly. Surely I would be near the front, at the family table, close to my parents and my brother. Table 1, Parentes of the Bride. Table 2, Bridal Party. Table 3, Extended Family, my cousins, aunts, uncles. Table 4. Table 5. Table 6. I read and reread, tracing the lines with my finger. My name was there. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Maybe they had forgotten to add me to the chart. My heart raced as I looked around, hoping someone would laugh and say, "Oh, Helen, don't worry, your name's right here, just hidden under the flowers." But no one said a word. Instead, I spotted a stranger, a tall young man I didn't recognize, sitting comfortably in the seat where I should have been. He was the guest of Margaret's cousin, someone I had never even met. And yet, here he was, occupying my place at the table while I was left to wander, nameless, invisible. I felt the heat rising in my cheeks. I wanted to march over, to demand an explanation, to claim my rightful seat as the groom's sister. But when I turned to look for support, all I saw was indifference. My family laughed at jokes I wasn't part of, posed for photos I wasn't invited into, and carried on as though I weren't even there. It was a silence louder than any insult. I stood still for a long moment, my hands clenched at my sides, trying to steady my breathing. Then, something in me settled. I realized that no one was going to stand up for me. Not my parents. Not my brother. Not anyone. So I decided to stand up for myself, but in my own way. I walked over to the gift table, where glittering envelopes and neatly wrapped boxes were stacked like a display of loyalty and affection. Among them was mine, a crisp white envelope containing 5,000 in cash. It wasn't just money, it was months of saving, a gesture of love, of support, of belief in my brother's future. I slipped it quietly into my purse. No one noticed. No one stopped me. And then, as I turned to leave, I caught Margaret's eye across the room. She was laughing with her bridesmaids, but for just a second, her gaze met mine. I didn't smile. I didn't wave. I simply mouthed the words, "Don't worry. I'll stay out of the picture forever." The music swelled, glasses clinked, and the celebration continued without me. But in that quiet act, I had already begun rewriting the story. Because while they thought they had erased me, they had no idea what I was capable of when pushed aside. I stood there for a moment longer, envelope tucked firmly in my purse, watching the celebration swirl around me. Laughter rang out, the clinking of champagne glasses echoed across the courtyard, and music floated in the air. But for me, it all sounded distant, muffled, as if I were listening from behind a pane of glass. Not one person noticed that I no longer had a seat. Not one person saw me take back my gift. And not one person asked if I was all right. The silence was deafening. I had grown used to silence throughout my life, silence when I gave up opportunities to stay close to home, silence when I paid off my brother's debts, silence when my achievements were brushed aside to make room for his. But this silence was different. This silence was final. I turned and began to walk toward the exit. The gravel crunched under my heels just as it had when I first arrived, but this time, each step felt heavier, more deliberate. My heart was pounding, but my face remained calm. If anyone had looked at me, they would have seen a woman leaving quietly, with dignity. As I reached the edge of the courtyard, I glanced back one last time. My brother, James, had finally appeared near the head table. He was smiling, laughing, basking in the glow of everyone's attention. He didn't notice me. He didn't see me walking away. That hurt more than anything. I had been there for him in every season of his life, when he struggled through school, when he bounced from one job to another, when his business teetered on the edge of collapse. I had been his quiet anchor. But at the moment when it mattered most, he couldn't even see me. I slipped out through the side gate, past the rows of parked cars, and into the quiet of the vineyard road. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the hills, painting the sky with streaks of orange and purple. It should have been beautiful, but to me, it felt hollow. Sitting in my car, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. I wanted to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. Instead, a different feeling spread through me, something sharper, steadier. Resolve. I realized then that this wasn't about a lost seat at a wedding or a cruel remark from a bride. This was about years of being overlooked, of being taken for granted, of being erased piece by piece until I almost believed I didn't matter. But I did matter. And what my family didn't know, what they couldn't possibly imagine, was that the stability they relied on, the safety net that had caught James again and again, was me. It had always been me. That night, as I drove away from the vineyard lights, I decided I would no longer be silent. My absence would not be invisible. They wanted me out of the picture? Very well. But they were about to learn what happens when the quiet one decides to step out of the shadows and take everything she has given back. 3 days after the wedding, I was back at my townhouse in San Diego, sipping coffee on the balcony. The weekend had left me drained, but I was determined to put it behind me. I told myself it was just one more slight in a lifetime of being overlooked. Nothing new. Nothing worth dwelling on. Then my phone rang. At first, I thought it was a wrong number. The screen showed James's name, but the time just after dawn made no sense. I hesitated before answering. Hello. What I heard on the other end was not the confident, charming younger brother everyone else adored. It was a broken voice, trembling with panic. Helen. I don't know what to do. I frowned, my grip tightening on the phone. James? What is wrong? Aren't you supposed to be on your honeymoon? There was a pause, followed by a sound I hadn't heard from him since he was a child, sobbing. They're saying the accounts are frozen. The supplier is pulling out. I don't know what happened. Everything's falling apart. I closed my eyes. I strained washed over me. Of course he didn't know. Of course he hadn't realized how fragile his little empire was, because I had been the one holding it together all along. You'll have to be more specific, I said, keeping my voice even. His words tumbled out, frantic and jumbled. Payments hadn't gone through. Employees were calling non-stop. The warehouse manager was threatening to quit. Deals that had seemed secure only a week ago were suddenly unraveling. I let him finish. Then I said the word that explained it all. Withdraw. Silence on the line. What? He whispered. I withdrew, James. Another pause, longer this time. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head, connecting the dots he'd ignored for so long. You mean it was you? His voice cracked. All this chimney. Yes, I replied. The payroll you couldn't cover? That was me. The supplier deposits? Me. The lease extension you thought was a miracle? Me again. He let out a choked sound, half disbelief, half despair. I fought. I thought I was finally doing it on my own, he stammered. No, I said softly but firmly. You fought wrong. I walked back inside, set my coffee cup on the counter, and stared at my reflection in the darkened kitchen window. For the first time in years, I didn't see the quiet, dependable sister. I saw someone who finally understood the weight she carried and the power it gave her. Why now? He asked finally, his voice small. I didn't answer right away. I let the silence stretch between us, a silence he had never noticed before, a silence that had always served him. Because, James, I said at last, you made it clear on Saturday that I'm not part of your picture. And without me in the picture, there's nothing holding it together. He begged, then pleaded, promised, even sobbed, but it was too late. For the first time in our lives, the silence belonged to me. My name is Ellen Carter. I'm 35 years old, and I am a structural engineer living in San Diego. That means, on any given day, I'm the one standing in a hard hat on a half-finished bridge or reviewing calculations that determine whether a tower will sway gently in the wind or collapse in an earthquake. My work is about strength, endurance, and quiet precision. It's about designing foundations that never get noticed until the day they're tested. And maybe that's why my story feels so bitterly ironic. Because I didn't just build structures that could withstand pressure. I became one. From the outside, my life looks fine. I own a modest townhouse that I paid for myself. I have shelves filled with books on architecture, travel journals, and souvenirs from solo trips to Greece, Portugal, and Japan. I've dined alone in Paris cafes and hiked mountains in Colorado without anyone to carry my bags. My independence isn't accidental, it's something I fought for, brick by brick. But independence, as I've learned, doesn't always translate into recognition. To my family, I'm not Helen, the engineer who has overseen projects that will stand for decades. I'm not the woman who carved out a life of stability and comfort on her own terms. No. In their eyes, I'm simply the reliable one. The dependable daughter. The sister who doesn't cause trouble. The one they can lean on endlessly, without ever stopping to ask if I'm tired of carrying the load. They call it a compliment, that word reliable. But it doesn't feel like one. Not after all these years. Because reliable isn't the same as respected. Reliable isn't celebrated. It doesn't come with the champagne toasts or the speeches about pride and legacy. Reliable just means invisible until something breaks. Growing up, I was the child who never asked for much. Straight A's, honor roll, scholarship offers, I collected them all quietly, while my parents were busy rushing to save James from his latest crisis. He was the one they bragged about at family dinners. He had potential, they said, even when he was unemployed for the third time in a year. He had ambition, they repeated, while I worked overtime to help him cover parking tickets and late fees. "Your brother has a spark," my father liked to say with a grin. And then he'd look at me, nodding as though I should understand, and add, "And you, Helen, you keep the peace." That phrase, "keep the peace," settled into my bones like a weight I couldn't shake. It was never about my dreams, my wants, my shine. It was about maintaining balance so that James could keep burning bright. But I learned something important in my work as an engineer. Even the strongest support beam can crack if too much weight rests on it for too long. At 35, standing at the edge of my brother's unraveling world, I realized I wasn't just reliable. I was the foundation. And foundations, when they shift, can bring down everything built on top of them. From the very beginning, my brother James was spectacular. At least, that's what everyone said. It didn't matter that he could barely tie his own shoes at age 5, or that he once spilled orange juice on the carpet during a birthday party. Somehow, every minor triumph he stumbled into became legendary. A scraped knee turned into a story about resilience. A faint smile in a school picture became proof that he had charm beyond his years. And me. I was there, of course, but mostly invisible. I learned early that my role was different. I was the shadow behind the spotlight, the one making sure the costumes were ready, the one picking up the papers he dropped, the one applauding loudly while my own heart quietly sank. My parents called James their golden child, and they weren't subtle about it. Every achievement, however small, was framed as proof of his exceptional nature. Honors I earned at school? Oh, that's nice, Helen. Extracurricular awards. Good job, Jeff. Meanwhile, James would win a school contest and the house would erupt in celebration. Balloons, applause, even a special dinner with his favorite dessert. It didn't matter that I was working twice as hard, or that my success required discipline, focus, and sacrifice. In their eyes, I was merely competent. Solid. Dependable. Predictable. I began to notice patterns. I was the mediator. De caretaquer. De peacequer. Whenever James faltered or argued with a teacher, I was the one who soothed tensions. Whenever he needed money, I was the one who lent it. Whenever the family's reputation was at stake, I was the one who quietly fixed the problems behind the scenes. "Your brother has a spark," my father said repeatedly, as though my efforts were invisible by design. And my mother. She smiled at me the same way you smile at a well-trained dog fondly, but never with real acknowledgement. I started to accept it. It seemed easier than fighting for recognition that would never come. I excelled quietly in school, studied engineering, and began to build a life that required no applause. My work became my identity, my sanctuary. But James, he thrived on attention. Every failure became a learning story, every minor success a family legend. And all the while, I was expected to carry the weight of reality. If he forgot something, I remembered. If he needed help, I helped. If he fell, I caught him. In a way, I was proud of him. Truly. I loved my brother, despite the imbalance. But there was a quiet, simmering resentment that grew with each overlooked achievement, each dismissed success. It wasn't anger at James, it was anger at the system that declared him more valuable simply because he demanded more attention. And now, at 35, as I watched James struggle with responsibilities he was never truly ready to handle, I realized something crucial. The golden child is just a title. It's fragile. It's not the achievements themselves that matter, it's the story that others choose to tell. And this story is mine to reclaim. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday, the kind that lulls you into thinking nothing will change. James had managed once again to misplace an important contract at work. Naturally, the fallout fell on me. I received frantic calls, emails marked urgent, and even a stern message from my father, implying that if I didn't intervene, everything would collapse. 4 years, I would have dropped everything, fixed the problem, and ensured the world saw James as competent. But that morning, as I sipped my tea and read the third panicked message, something inside me shifted. I felt an unfamiliar weight, not of responsibility, but of defiance. I thought about all the moments I had been overlooked, the science fair trophies, the scholarships, the promotions. I thought about the evenings spent comforting James after minor embarrassments, the weekends lost to organizing his chaotic life, the quiet sacrifices that no one had acknowledged. And I realized I had been invisible by choice, in the sense that I had allowed others to dictate my worth. That Tuesday, I decided it was time to stop. I called James. "I can't handle this for you," I said firmly, something I had never dared before. "You need to figure it out." There was a pause. I could almost hear the shock through the line. "But I don't know where to start," he stammered. "That's the point," I replied. "You're 35. It's time to take responsibility. I've been your safety net for too long." The conversation was short, tense, and surprisingly liberating. For the first time, I felt the thrill of setting boundaries without guilt. My hands, which had always been busy smoothing over chaos, now rested calmly on the table. My mind, which had always raced to solve others' problems, began to focus on my own path. That evening, I wrote a long list of personal goals. Not just work objectives, but real ambitions, travel plans, financial independence, even hobbies I had abandoned in favor of caretaking. And for the first time in my life, I imagined a version of myself that did not exist solely in James's shadow. It wasn't easy. That night, I replayed the memories of every ignored achievement, every unnoticed effort. A wave of sadness swept over me, but it was accompanied by a powerful truth. I had allowed others to define my value, but I didn't have to anymore. The next morning, I began small. I declined an unnecessary meeting James expected me to attend. I completed my own work before rushing to solve someone else's crisis. I even smiled at my reflection in the mirror, feeling something I hadn't felt in decades, genuine self-respect. James noticed. "Are you different?" he asked, curiosity tinged with a hint of panic. "Yes," I said, "because I finally realized I matter too." That day marked the beginning of a transformation. The golden child would no longer define the rules of our family. I would. And with each small assertion, I felt my world expanding, the invisible chains loosening, the long-suppressed excitement of self-determination filling every corner of my life. For the first time, I understood, turning points aren't loud or dramatic. They're quiet decisions that reshape everything from the inside out. And this was mine. The vineyard was quiet when I arrived, the early morning sun casting long shadows across the manicured rows of grapevines. I parked my car on the gravel driveway, listening to the soft crunch under my tires, and for a moment, I allowed myself a small, private sigh. Today, the wedding of my younger brother Ryan and Vanessa Monroe was finally here. The day I had been anticipating with a mix of dread and curiosity. A day meant for celebration, but also, for me, a reckoning. I walked toward the entrance, adjusting the hem of my slate blue dress and smoothing my hair back from my face. Everything around me was meticulously staged white tents, floral arrangements spilling in perfect cascades, and signs in elegant cursive guiding guests to the wine tasting, the photo booths, the reception area. A string quartet played soft, generic classical music that floated over the grounds, perfectly pleasant but impersonal, as if even the sound itself had been curated to exclude any real warmth. I paused, letting the sunlight warm my shoulders. For a fleeting second, I almost allowed myself to believe I was mistaken in expecting anything different, that perhaps the tension in my chest was mine alone. Perhaps they would see me, acknowledge all I had done quietly behind the scenes, and welcome me as part of their celebration. I approached the seating chart first, an oversized mirror propped elegantly on a gold easel, framed with pale pink roses and greenery. My eyes skimmed down the lists of names. Table 1, parents of the bride. Table 2, bridal party. Table 3, extended family. Then Table 4. I paused. My name wasn't there. My heart sank as my eyes traveled to the other tables, scanning each one, hoping for an error, a missed placement. Nothing.
No mention.
I wasn't even listed as a +1 for Ryan. A subtle but sharp pang of disbelief struck me. This wasn't oversight. This was deliberate. I realized then, with a sudden clarity, that today I would exist as a ghost in my own brother's wedding. Present physically, perhaps, but invisible in every way that mattered. I took a deep breath, forcing my hands to stop trembling as I clutched my small purse. I had rehearsed this moment in my mind countless times, smiling politely, nodding in greeting, avoiding conflict, staying out of the frame. Yet, standing there in front of that mirror, reading the glaring omission, the rehearsed calm felt hollow. All those years of silently supporting Ryan, of putting his needs above my own, of signing leases and floating payroll while remaining unacknowledged, they had culminated in this moment. My presence was no longer required or wanted. I felt the familiar sting of being the good daughter, the quiet support beam that everyone relied on but no one noticed. And yet, as I stepped toward the entrance, I realized something else. Perhaps it was time to test the limits of that invisibility, to see if being overlooked meant being powerless, or if there was still a quiet strength in simply standing there and watching. I held my head high, forcing my shoulders back, letting my gaze sweep across the perfectly arranged tables, the bustling servers, the chatting guests. If I was invisible, then let me be the observer. Let me witness the careful curation of a day meant to celebrate a union, while silently acknowledging all the invisible labor that had kept Ryan's world afloat. Today, I would be present. And today, I would remember. The ceremony began just as the sun reached its highest point, casting a warm golden glow over the vineyard. Guests murmured softly among themselves, eyes fixed on the floral arch at the end of the aisle. I remained near the back, deliberately keeping a distance, pretending to be just another attendee, invisible and polite. My heart beat faster with each note of the string quartet, each measured step of the bridal procession. Every smile, every hand extended in congratulations, felt like a reminder that I was not supposed to be here, not really. Ryan appeared first, in a tailored navy suit that fit him perfectly. He looked confident, calm, happy. I felt a twist of something bitter and sharp in my chest. I had watched him grow into this moment, had been there for late-night conversations about his dreams, had whispered encouragements when he doubted himself. Yet today, I was not part of the spotlight, not part of the photographs, not even mentioned in passing by the people who had known him all these years. Vanessa followed, radiant in a flowing ivory gown, her smile effortless. There was a kind of perfection in the way she moved, a rehearsed grace that seemed to belong more to a storybook than to real life. My gaze followed her closely, noting the way Ryan's eyes softened when they met hers, the subtle nervous flutter in her fingers. It should have been enough to step aside quietly, to let them have this moment undisturbed. And yet, as the officiant spoke, recounting their journey together, I felt a strange surge of determination. Today, I would not shrink completely into the shadows. During the vows, something shifted in me. The words they exchanged were tender and precise, but the energy between them, between all these people who had circled around my brother for years, made me feel both excluded and strangely alive. I realized I was seeing everything from a perspective few ever noticed. The nervous glances, the small whispered corrections from bridesmaids, the fleeting anxiety in Ryan's eyes that no one else would admit. I became aware of the subtle orchestration behind the scenes, the invisible currents shaping the day. And in that awareness, I found a certain power. When they finally exchanged rings and shared their first kiss as husband and wife, applause erupted. I clapped along with everyone else, a polite smile on my face, but my mind was elsewhere. I thought of all the invisible hours I had invested in family dinners, in lending a hand when no one else asked, in keeping secrets that were never mine to tell. Today, I understood that my worth was not measured by recognition in a guest list or placement at a table. I was here, I had witnessed it all, and that knowledge carried a quiet, unacknowledged strength. As they turned to face their guests, basking in applause and smiles, I stepped back, letting them have the light. But deep inside, I made a silent vow. I would not be invisible forever. I would find a way to claim my space, to let my presence be known not in grand gestures, not with fanfare, but with the subtle insistence of someone who had always been there, quietly holding the foundation together. The sun had dipped low over the vineyard, casting long golden shadows across the manicured rows of grapevines. Evelyn Walker, 35, stood at the edge of the reception, her hands folded lightly in front of her, a glass of sparkling water catching the fading light. She had spent the day moving quietly through the crowd, smiling when expected, nodding politely, never stepping into the spotlight. And yet, for the first time in her life, she felt a deep sense of clarity settle over her. She watched Ryan laugh, holding Vanessa's hand as they floated through their friends and family, basking in the attention she had long expected would overshadow her presence. For years, she had been the quiet backbone, the stable one, the unseen force who had kept the family and her brother afloat, but today, she realized that being invisible did not mean being unimportant. A soft hand touched her shoulder. She turned to see June, her cousin, smiling warmly. "I'm glad you're here," she said simply. "Not because you had to be, but because you chose to come. You deserve to enjoy this too." Evelyn felt a flicker of gratitude she hadn't allowed herself to feel all day. Even in a room full of voices, one acknowledgement, genuine and quiet, could feel like a lifeline. Evelyn took a slow breath, letting the cool evening air wash over her. She didn't need to confront Vanessa, didn't need to demand recognition. Her satisfaction was internal. She had supported Ryan in silence, yes, but she had also made conscious choices. She had held boundaries, lent help without losing herself, and maintained her dignity. That was her triumph. Across the lawn, Ryan spotted her. His eyes widened for a brief moment, a flicker of guilt and realization passing across his face. He hurried over, hesitant at first, as though approaching a truth he had ignored for too long. "Evelyn," he began, voice catching. "I don't know if I ever properly thanked you. For everything. I couldn't have done this without you." She looked at him, at the brother she had quietly saved time and time again. She nodded, a small smile forming. "You don't have to say it," she replied softly. "You just need to know it."
No dramatic enfrentaschen, no laud que enfesten.
Just a quiet recognition. That was enough. Evelyn walked back into the crowd with a lighter step, finally allowing herself to savor the celebration without carrying invisible weight. She saw familiar faces laughing, clinking glasses, children chasing each other across the grass, and for the first time, she felt fully present, not a shadow in someone else's story, but a part of life's vibrant texture. Later, as the last guests began to leave, Evelyn lingered by the vineyard fence, watching the sun sink below the hills. She allowed herself a moment of reflection. She had been invisible, yes, but only to those who could not see. She had been essential all along, and now she finally acknowledged it herself. The quiet triumph was hers alone, and in that serenity, Evelyn found something that no wedding, no family expectation, could ever take away, a sense of self, unshakable, undeniable, and fully her own.